Kia ora everybody, welcome back to Stuff That Matters now, and I've had a lovely walk this morning in the wind and the rain, trying to find out where I was supposed to go, and I'm going to say kia ora to Haylee Putaranui.
Perfect.
And I'm here because Lara's told me to be here, like a good boy. Good morning. No, it's not good morning. It's early afternoon. So, Haylee, thank you for agreeing to this podcast, not knowing what we're talking about, and agreeing to this. Who are you?
Oh, well, tēnā koe, Ian, Harvey, Harv. O tira ki a koutou e whakarongo ana. Here tēnei o Ngāti Maniapoto, piki ake ki Te Aitanga Hauiti, hiki ho ki Ngāti Pāhauera, ko Waiaria Takuta Māhine, ko Haylee ahau. So kia ora, my friend, thank you very much for flying up for a storm, given the wrong instructions and finding your way to us. My name is Haylee, my baby or my daughter's Waiaria. As I said, I'm from Ngāti Maniapoto, so anyone who is from King Country, Te Rohui Pōtai, Te Nehe Nui, on my mum's side and on my dad's side, I said I jumped over the country to Te Aitanga Hauiti, so Tolaga Bay, and then coming down or up, depending on which way you believe the South Island or the North Island is, down to Ngāti Pāhauera, which is around Raupunga, Wairoa, so in between Napier and Wairoa, there's a place called Raupunga, and that's on my dad's side, and my dad was one of the ones, in his family at least, he was the eldest boy, and he was whāngai to his grandparents, so he sort of was brought up, and we count both of those. So yeah, from Te Kuiti over to Tolaga Bay and then down to Raupunga, is sort of in that vicinity is who I am and who I'm from. And as I said, my baby is Waiaria. She's 27, so I'm not sure I'll ever stop calling her my baby. And those are my people, and that's who I am. And as I said, I'm Haylee.
And is she cool with being called the baby?
Yeah, she is. Well, she's the only one. So between her father and I, who we're not together anymore, but she's always been our girl or our baby. And I've got a niece who's 10, and we call her Baba. So for all of the advancements in language, there are still people like us who stick to very simple language.
Yeah, and it generally works pretty well,
yes.
and for a long, long time.
Yes.
Yeah. Haylee, you met Lara and worked with Lara in Fonterra.
Mm-hmm. I did. Yeah, so as the saying goes, nāku te waimarie, so the pleasure and honour was mine to work alongside Lara. I think when someone like Lara comes along, you know, I actually found her, and sorry, my friend, if you're listening to this, please take this as a compliment, but I actually found her quite a stern fish to start off with. A hot fish, and I'm sure she's a tasty fish, but I just found her to be quite a stern person at first, but when we sort of worked together a bit more, I really started to see the depths and layers, and then I got to work with Lara a little bit more closer when I was in the Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for Fonterra, and of course there's a natural kind of, because it's her space as well, and she was doing quite a bit of work on inclusion for one of the business units, so research and development. So I was sort of in that sort of global, collective, or enterprise-wide role, and then she was doing some work in the business unit. So very cool crossovers, and yeah, both of us have obviously left Fonterra now, but it's one of the friendships, and I call it a friendship because that's what it is, albeit that we met in a working capacity, that I still consider a really good friend of mine.
It's interesting. Some of those friendships through work are often some of the strongest, aren't they?
Yeah. And with that, I think I quickly will say some of them you might see people in the supermarket as well that you work with, and I think, oh gosh, quickly aisle two, quickly cross over. Don't make eye contact, but definitely. And even if I think back to, I've got a legal background, and I think back to my first firm, I went to work there because the partner at the time was one of my really good friends, Peter Jeffries, who was an older student when we were at law school, and he was this he would have been late 40s and I think he's got about 6 kids and had mokos then. He was this daggy older dude that used to wear those Canterbury rugby shorts.
Yes.
And I used to think, man, look at this guy. But we ended up becoming really good friends, and then he went into practice and he was the first partner, recruited me into his firm, and him and I are still really close as well. I think he's just had his 70th. So quite a different kind of, maybe an unconventional friendship, but I still count Pete as a really good friend.
Mm. I don't know where we are. I mean, I got lost this morning. I went somewhere.
Yes, not helped by your directions you were given. My apologies.
Look, just some background. I went into this foyer today, and I go in there and I plugged in your name, and it didn't find it. I went, oh, she's lost a job. What's going on? and I was thinking, where am I? I don't know where I am now.
Yeah, well, nau mai hara mai, ki Aotearoa NZ. You are in the Aotearoa building. And Aotearoa, this is week 4 for me in this role, by the way. But this organisation is really cool. It's basically a startup. They've not long been, so I think they've been in this actual building for less than 3 months. But the very quick history of this is that when the internet and the interwebs and all the rest of it was becoming a thing, and the government was starting to sell rights to big companies to be able to build infrastructure and digital infrastructure, so the internet, Māori at the time were having conversations, and had the conversation with the Crown at the time to say, if you are selling rights to spectrum into the airways, into this invisible thing that none of us can see, touch, but clearly someone is going to be making money out of it, we want rights to that as well, because we consider it a taonga. So that's that whole, land that you can touch, but also what you can't touch above the earth. And of course the Crown at the time rubbished it and said no, and Māori, being what they are and a very determined group at the time, kept going with the fight.
I think they're determined, not just at the time, they're determined most of the time.
All the time, absolutely. And so they were determined and kept the fight up. And finally, through different iterations, the last government acknowledged that whilst they won't give you any, I think it's legal rights in a sense, they acknowledged that Māori did have rights to spectrum, and so gave some cash and some rights, some legal rights. It stopped at legislation, and legislation would be great, but just for a whole lot of reasons. So Aotearoa is the sort of latest iteration of that, and that Māori are now starting to be, this is the sort of physical manifestation of that dream, and that Māori will have a part in digital infrastructure in this country. So, will we be a spark or a 1, is that what they're called, or a 2 degrees? And actually Māori, you might remember that Māori at one stage were owners in 2 degrees. That's all related to this iteration here. And so, it's a really exciting company to be in. As I say, it's week 4 for me, so I'm learning lots, really good people, and definitely a big change. So
the function of this organisation is what?
It's to enable, so it's a kind of honouring the Crown's acknowledgement, I guess, that Māori have rights to spectrum.
Mm-hmm. What's spectrum?
So spectrum is basically the airwaves that, so the internet, for example, so the internet travels upon, so basically cables, but also, it's hard to describe because you can't see it as well, or touch it or feel it. But also it's the networks, basically the invisible networks that run, and the last bit is these are actually cables and wires that run somewhere. But when we turn our phones on, satellites, all those things, that's all part of the digital infrastructure, and it will continue, of course, to be even more important. And so this company here has owned some spectrum rights. So spectrum is quite valuable because, as you can imagine, for big companies like the Sparks and the they're called, Vodafones, I want to say, but ones.
And the Starlink?
Yeah, they're slightly different because they, rather than digital mobile, so obviously talking about one part, but yes, all in the same sphere. And they call it a radio network as well. And when I came in, I had to do some quick Googling and some quick chat GPTing, because I just thought radio networks meant, when I hop in my car and I turn on my radio, is that the radio?
It's a bit more than that, isn't it?
It really is. It's again, radio network is another term in this digital infrastructure world that they use. And again, bearing in mind, please don't accuse me of promoting fake information as well, because I'm week 4 in this role.
Got it. Okay. So
but to anyone
that.
listening, if I've got anything wrong, please do correct me. I'm absolutely happy to be. But this company, to answer your, so it's about a Māori participation in that. It's about Māori also commercialising that as well, and it's also so that we're not just passive users of technology. We actually own the infrastructure. It's very new. It's very exciting. There'll be people out there, of course, as with anything that. That sort of say, Māori are getting a sort of free ride to, and all those sorts of things. And I maybe 10 years ago, I would engage in a debate. 2025, I just think here we are, and it's a really exciting time. And for me personally, it's exciting because I sort of came from sort of 15 years as a lawyer, and as you know, lawyers, we know everything that there is to know in the world.
Is that true?
Absolutely not. And then I had 10 years at Fonterra, and so I felt like, in terms of learning, it's really nice to be out of my comfort zone and really soaking up information, because I feel like, and I'm sure we'll get into that later half, but I felt like I have this real penchant for learning, and for a long time I felt like I hadn't kind of been learning. And to go back to the lawyer comment, what I mean by that is I was at a big law firm before Fonterra, and I'd gone into Fonterra from Chapman Tripp, which is one of the big, top 5 firms. And I went into this business, and I thought I had this view that the whole world evolves around lawyers. And when I went into Fonterra, I got a shock for about the first 3 months, because I thought, oh my God, the whole world goes around, and actually around. And not only does it survive and thrive without lawyers, maybe we might be part of the problem too. And so I had this real awakening, because I was like, oh God. And my friend who was in the business, I tried to say something like, oh, you better run that past the lawyers from a risk perspective. And he was like, the product's already. I was like, sorry? He's like, Haylee, the product's already on the line. I'm not asking you how to fix it. I'm telling you, And I was shocked, because I was like, what the hell? And so I had to really get my head around really quickly around, like, oh God, that was a real leveler for me. And then obviously now I'm a big proponent of get stuff done, and then we'll fix it up. I mean, obviously these big things, and that can't be the case all the time. But even coming back in, we have a few sets of lawyers, and even I laugh at. I don't laugh. I laugh with care, but I'm like, that's not a risk. They're just so risk averse, and it's the training that you definitely receive. But I had to roll my eyes a couple of times.
There are certain, one of the privileges of my role is I get to meet people from so many different backgrounds.
Sure.
And some professions aren't very good for you. I think being a lawyer can be one of those, in that it can give you it teaches you to look for all the things that are wrong.
Oh, really? That is your role, and that's what I mean by that example. My friend, I was like, you need to run this, and he was like, the product's already in Vietnam or somewhere. I was like, what? And he was like, also, and I was like, what about the disclaimer or whatever? I'd written this amazing 50 million page disclaimer, and no one was ever going to read. He was like, what? I was like, what if it poisons, someone? He was like, well, we'll deal with that.
We don't have time for that. And, this is a big machine like Fonterra. It's got all the resources, right? But, yeah. And, look, I had an example recently where a chap had been with this business for ever, and he was my age, and came to retirement. His role was all about the products, and I won't say too much so it doesn't disclose anything, but all about all the information. He knew all the things, and he was this walking encyclopedia, and everybody was like, wow, when he retires we're going to lose all that knowledge, and now he's been gone 6 months, nobody's missed him, and people have actually got off their ass and as different products and so forth, and they've Googled and they've gone and worked it out, and okay, it's not that hard. And he hasn't been replaced and nobody's missed him. And it was just like this thing that, this guy knew all the things he was to know, which was part of his sort of modus operandi, that I'm the man, I'm really important. As it turned out, he wasn't.
Yeah, and I think that's the same with my thinking. That's what I mean. It was so... First of all, I think I went from alarmed that this multi-million-dollar business had it there, and then I went to and then I guess the point is too, it's not about not needing lawyers or not needing people that just go off and do things and potentially recklessness. It's about having a balance of everyone, right, and knowing the times. And so, as I said, over the last sort of few weeks, because I have a slightly different lens now, I just have a better, I guess, nose for picking up on the things that are in the different categories, low, medium, high risk kind of bucket.
We need to take notice of this.
We need to take notice of this. Yeah.
Something just ran through my head before, and I normally write it down, but I haven't, because of the way I'm travelling today. I don't have my briefcase with me, or my little bag, and so I haven't written it down. And so it's gone totally out of my little head.
Right.
And so this is what this pause is at the moment. This is called making a noise.
Yes, well, I can validate that, and I will validate it on the basis that, I'm a peripausal woman at the moment, half. So
I'm not saying anything.
So we have these extended pauses, which are absolutely okay, and so it's normal to have those as well.
Okay.
So that's absolutely fine.
Okay. You call this a company. Is it what sort of company?
It's pretty small. I think we have 20 staff in this parent company, and then we've actually they bought before I got here, acquired another company which is called Broadtech, and they're called Aotearoa Network Services, which is super cool. So there's about 100 staff down there, and we're in the process of a very high confidential purchase that I can't talk too much about, but that's cool as well. And it's around just participation and Māori participation.
Yep.
We've got a way to go, because I think even for ourselves, and this is one of the interesting things, I think sometimes when you see a Māori company, people either come to it with curiosity, or sometimes I think people also go, oh, what does that mean? Do they just all talk Māori in there? They're all running around in grass skirts, maybe. Or people sometimes are a little bit cynical, what the hell does that mean? So, and we know what that is. So this is the parent company, and so we're charged with our strategy is around sort of three parts. One, making an impact. So this was part of the agreement with the Crown that sort of an exchange for, I guess, a settlement of sorts, and that we would impact jobs through jobs creation for Māori. So that's a really cool part that they do here. They run a whole academy around innovation, trying to tap into our people's minds. And so, for a long time, Māori have tended to go into sort of jobs, we go into sort of menial jobs, or I know if we use the Fonterra context, most of our people, we had about 1,500 Māori staff, and most were in the factories, tanker drivers and on the factories, and those are great jobs. But when you talk about professional services, not so much representation in the commercial and all the rest of it. So that's cool here, and also with a real eye on the future to technology, the jobs that, because that's one of the other issues as we saw through COVID, and also as technology evolves, that the risk with those jobs is that they will also be the ones that will firstly get replaced by technology. So one of the parts of this strategy here is to really upskill our people into roles that we never would have been in before. So technological roles, getting out in the field, being the ones that go out and fix the satellites and just expose new minds to new roles. The second part is it's got a commercial part. So, we partner with companies in this whole digital technology sphere to provide a service and make money. And then, just trying to, it's very new, it's very fast moving. And for someone like me, it's really interesting coming from a massive company to a really small company that is, I guess, not so well resourced, both people-wise, but also just little things. I was my very little privileged world. When I come in and sort of ask for where's the double-sided printer, that's no such thing here. And so you just kind of get used. But the flip side for me too is I'm getting re-exposed to lots of things that I haven't thought about for a long time. So getting involved in a bit of mergers and acquisitions, getting into the nitty-gritty of I was helping one of the team out yesterday with some contract with Warner Brothers and services out in the field, and really having to think about drafting, also leading the policy program, and then also working with governors. So real cool, diverse role that are using parts of my brain that had been dormant for quite a while, and I hadn't for a long time been conscious of that, because I just got quite into what can often happen to people, right? You're just very good at your role, but it is you are in a bit of a tune without knowing it, and the tune becomes normalised, and that's very much what I was in.
It's one of the downsides of success. You end up doing the same shit over and over and over, and before long, and your knowledge is decreasing as you go forward.
Without you even knowing.
Without even knowing.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Yep.
Yeah.
I see it, and then people don't get the feedback, and then people start believing their own bullshit, and it's like time to get a rain check and actually spread that, and exercise that muscle again.
Yeah.
Hey presto, I've remembered what I was going to say before.
There we go.
And it's still relevant, I hope. It's something that I learned from a woman 10 years ago. She was an IP specialist, and she was English, and she had developed the IP laws for the G7, and I'd written about her in my book, and a stunning smart woman. And she used to get so frustrated with New Zealanders with their view of what IP was, and how they want to protect it and lock it up and it's mine and whatever. And she would say the only people I work with who actually understand IP are Māori, because Māori are about sharing it and developing it and layering it, and then using that as their protection of keeping the IP. And she said they do it naturally, and it's always stuck with me.
It's an interesting view, because if you were to inform your view, I think, through mainstream media in New Zealand, you would probably think that actually the reverse, Māori are quite selfish, and we always seem to be arguing or moaning around protection. But I agree with her, because that view is typically come after a whole lot of frustration. So, the kamate haka, as we all know, has long been both misunderstood as the haka that Te Rauparaha did in that context, and then obviously commercialised by, most famously, the All Blacks, but used. And people, I think, forget that, and they get quite cynical around, well, you just want to make money out of it. And I often think, well, yes, just the same as you, and why wouldn't we? I think intellectual property, the interesting thing about it is the transmission of that knowledge, because I think what she's saying in there, perhaps, or maybe where I was going, is we have an innate understanding. If we don't hand on your knowledge, then it simply won't survive. And I think the better, and I'm count myself as lucky, my nan and my great-grandmother were both weavers, harakeke weavers, and the one thing that they always talked about is sharing that, and because if we don't share, then simply the art will die, the practice will die. And there was always a layer within that too. They were pretty progressive, I think, in their, because there's obviously tikanga, it's always been typically done by women, and for carving, the art of wood carving, that's something that's typically done by men, or is done by men. But my nan and my great-grandmother were big believers, and so they would progressive in the sense that a lot of those gender norms they would challenge. If someone didn't, irrespective of their gender or identity, their number one rule was that they would teach anyone that was willing to learn. And I like being guided by that, I think, too. If someone is good and wants to learn, but also gets himself there and turns up, but also doesn't need, a ride there the next day and all the rest of it, then those are the signs that someone is willing to learn.
Yep.
So I like what, that woman is saying there.
Yeah. Look, it was really interesting, and she was quite forthright with it, and very frustrated with Kiwis just thinking that IP was to be locked up, protected. And she said there only was, look, I won't go into it, but our laws back then certainly weren't worth locking it up.
Yeah.
And she was pretty frustrated with that as well. So a company like this, who owns it?
Ultimately, we've got, I think we count ourselves as being owned by kaitiaki, so actual individuals, but ultimately it's owned by Māori. That's who is our ultimate benefactor, and that's who we ultimately, so my boss, actually the CEO today, is at this moment at iwi chairs, because iwi chairs represent a collective group, one of, not the only, but a collective of Māori, and so we report to them. And so when we have, instead of using the Fonterra example, instead of the farmers, we would say the farmers are our owner at Fonterra, which they are. We say here at Tuatea that Māori are our ultimate. But it's ownership. There's a nuance in there around ownership.
And this is why I'm asking, because I'm thinking this. I knew it'd be different from the Western model, right?
Yes. So in terms of our metrics, we measure health and actually the United Nations has got a framework around inclusive wealth, is what it's called, and these different pillars.
As part of the SDGs?
Yeah, that's right. And so we use that as well. And if you have a look, if anyone's read the most recent iteration of the Burl Māori Economy Report, or Te Ohanga Māori, they use that framework as well, and to count sort of human capital, wealth capital, and then do that in a really inclusive way. And that's the same way we think about things as well. However, we are a company, and we have ultimately, so our directors expect us to report in metrics that include money, commercial wealth, but also how many people are we impacting by job creations, how many people have we had through, how many people have we enabled. And so we've got the last big focus we've got is, and we've got a really cool project at the moment around digital equity. So where are our rural communities who just don't even have access to internet? And it's hard to believe for us city dwellers, and I'm talking about me when I say us, it's hard to believe that people don't have access to internet. But I tell you what, a couple of hours up the road, even from Auckland, up in Northland and other regions, that is a very real.
Yep.
And again, it's not we don't flinch. I think when most of us pay our Spark bill or our One bill or whatever, our internet bill, but that money, the extra $120 a month, if that's what the cost is, people just don't have it. So
it's a big deal.
It's been a real mind-blowing for me. And again, if you frame it in the sense of digital equity and people having even access, not just to go on social media, but access to tools, access to everything, digital equity, and it's another one area in New Zealand, an index that is really going out of kilter at the moment. And again, if you're better resourced in this country, you will have great access to digital tools. If you have less resource, then you are lagging behind, and that certainly is the case at the moment.
Wife and I live 12 kilometres out of Bulls towards the coast. Until Starlink came along, we had really no internet. So we had Farmside, which was really clunky, and it was very slow, and it was, Starlink comes along, and it's just revolutionised it. Wow. And we are only 13 kilometres from town, but we can afford it. And if it wasn't for that, we would really, really struggle with internet.
The world, And I think that's the case. So we've got a big focus on digital equity here. So when we talk about ownership, definitely first and foremost, we say our owners are Māori. and we are kaitiaki of that duty. So it comes with, serious responsibilities, but we also, I guess, someone like me and these others who have been in those big companies, it's a really cool way to bring in our experiences and the ways we see. And also too, there's been a whole, there's been some levelers for me as well around just reminding myself and constantly calling myself out as well around, yep, that's one way to do things, but actually there's other ways to do things here, and just because you've been in the bigger companies in New Zealand it's not the be all anymore. I've also had really funny experiences to have. So we have te reo and waiata every week here, and I'm not going to name any names, and I know that people in my previous role always came with the intent to do their best, but when we started doing a waiata here for the first time, I got quite a shock because they could harmonise and they picked up the words really quickly, and I was thinking, oh my God. And I did have a laugh. I had a laugh with joy, not to ridicule my colleagues from the past, but I was like, oh man, I waited so long for this to happen because, as I said, my non-Māori colleagues, I know they used to try their best, but I don't know what it is. I used to always say to them, just sing from your puku. But it was the Anglo-Saxon thing of singing from kind of hearish. I don't know what it is, but just couldn't bloody sing. And I was like...
Haylee, many years ago I was a shearer, and I remember the Māori rousies, right, taking the piss out of us honkies, the way we danced. We'd go to the pub and they would be, oh, look at the stick fingers dancing. I'm like, oh, fuck off. It was just like, and it was so funny. And then they would sing, and I mean, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, I just had this little moment where I just cracked up to myself because I was like, oh man, I've waited so long for this to happen. And then just the enunciation, the pronunciation, but just little things like that just roll off the tongue, whereas I used to spend so much time and energy around, it doesn't matter, just go do it, just make it effort. But actually, by the time I'd left, I think I had just become quite frustrated as well.
Right.
Because I was like, yes, it takes effort, but come on, we've been at this for 3 years now.
Yep.
Come on.
Yep.
We should be there-ish
Yep.
by now. And I don't know, people, I'm sure people tried their hardest, and I always wanted to be careful not to make people feel bad, but come on.
I follow a guy on Facebook, a guy Davis, Māori guy, and he every day comes out with a new word, new place name, and
did he do Aotearoa the other day? Yeah, I saw. Yeah, amazing.
So good, isn't he?
Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah, he's awesome.
The thing I don't like about it, and I've made a comment in the thing, and go, I have learnt to pronounce Tamarunui, right? That's how I was taught, and so don't make fun of me.
Yes,
right.
I agree with that, and I mean I was the same when I grew up. I grew up in Tukawari. That's just what we called it. And now when I go back, it's Te Koeti, which is so much more beautiful.
Yep.
Piu Piu, Pio Pio, Aotearoa, Odo. When I was going, I went for 7th form or year 13. I went to Hamilton Girls High School. One of my really good friends, I said, where are you from? Te Kowara. And I was like, where the hell's that? I'd never heard of it before. Te Kowhata. But I just never knew that it was Te Kowara. And to your point, this is people... There was lots of other examples. I had some really cool, Pakeha farmers from down the deep south that would say things like, Haylee, can you help me with my te reo? And I'd be like, and they, and one of their things, I remember one of the motivations was, I've got more kapuna. And they're saying to me, that's not how you say it. And I thought, do you know what, however you've got here, amazing. And so I would always give my time for, and these are people that are, a product of their circumstance, right? An education system that, in a society that for, I don't know, they were over 70s. So to your point, Harvey, I was in the same vein as even the pale male stale thing. It's not a nuance that I ever used when I was doing my diversity, equity, inclusion stuff.
Because it's not very inclusive.
It's really not inclusive, and I also think it's just surefire way just to either annoy people, piss people off, or
Yeah.
certainly you're not going to win their heart. So it's just that's just for me. I know lots of other people do, and cool. It just was a nuance or a term that I never used.
Yeah.
So I just didn't.
It's interesting, because it's I'm part of that demographic of of feeling left behind, and that's not a great feeling,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, we are the most privileged group, right? White male, owned the world for thousands of years, and so it's tricky. It's tricky to be losing that dominance, and I've got no qualms with that. But there are times it's just, this is hard. This is hard.
Yeah, it is hard, and I guess that's the reality of change, and it comes with complexity. But it was also, when I was in that diversity, equity and inclusion role, it was also one of the things, because I also found my most ardent allies in the room.
Yeah.
For different reasons. Gaza from Matamata, who just didn't need that stuff, but also had the courage in a break to tell me that, he's got a gay son and still loved his child, but just didn't know how. And certainly in the tea room at Fonterra at the time, he was at one of the sites, it wasn't the social chat. So certainly hadn't shared that part of him.
Mm.
And, I had deep aroha for that, right? You think of that as a man, as a dad. I don't know what that's like, but certainly I do know that most parents do have a love for our kids.
Yeah.
And I think he was coming from a place of fear, actually,
Yeah.
around what it means for his
Yeah.
child. And actually just didn't have the tools.
Yeah, and relevance, and am I still relevant, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There'll be people listening to this podcast that will be thinking, okay, so this is a company that's been set up using government money, taxpayers' money, to make money for Māori. This co-governance bullshit, or here we go again. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think there's two parts for me, and far be it for me to do it justice in the space of, I don't know how long else we've got to go have. So my big recommendation is to go out and read well-versed people like, Claudia Oranges, Anne Salmon, I think at the moment, Ranginui Walker, they're incredible. But the Whistle Stop Tour, in answer to that, is Māori are partner to the Crown, always have been, and, people's minds always go to deprivation and deficit. And what this is a manifestation of a solution. What this is about participation. What this is about finding answers. Again, commercial participation, being in spaces that we haven't been for a long time. So it will be different. Don't think about perhaps too much around the fact that, because I'm a taxpayer, and so I think our minds get quite preoccupied with the taxpayer being the white demographic of Aotearoa. But I'm part of that as well. And so I would say 100% give my tax money to anything that addresses the inequity issues in this country. And this is part of the solution. So we can wax lyrical and moan forever and a day about my tax money and Māori are this, that and the other thing. The interesting thing about that argument is that they always go to, but what are you going to do about the Māoris? What about how every Māori is, a beneficiary and poor and all the rest of it? Again, my quick answer is this is part of the solution. And we either want solutions or we don't. And you can't have both. You can't, on the one hand, continue to moan forever and also say, but actually, I prefer you to stay there. I prefer Māori to stay in that space. Because not only does it feed a narrative that suits me, I won't say it out loud because I think I'm a nice person, but even nice people can have terrible thoughts, which is Māori should forever stay in those, occupying those statistics. So that's my quick answer, is that we're part of the solution. And it's an exciting solution, and our door is always open, is my second part to that half. What is our address? It's 15B, not 33. But our door is always open. Please come in and see us and visit us and be part of, and perhaps one thing that you might go away with, I would hope you would go away with, is, wow. We always are so accustomed to giving these big offshore companies, of which Vodafone was one, or New Zealand, that's an offshore company. I'm not sure if the iteration here, but we're so, this is around mana motuhake for Aotearoa as we evolve as a country, and mana motuhake is about self-determination. Again, I think people in their minds get images of our people waving the tino rangatiratanga flag,
Yep.
and then they go to Waitangi Day, and then they think of and they just go, oh God, that's Māoris being angry. If you think one of the things that excites me about young New Zealanders, and I mean all New Zealanders, Māori, Pakeha, ethnic, whatever you count yourself as Aotearoa, your home, these kids don't have the same baggage that so many of us have, and
Isn't that cool?
It's so cool. And so coming back to this IT issue and the sharing issue, I actually think, and I grapple with this in my mind all the time around how Māori are also going to share, little things like the use of pepeha by non-Māori. And I've had this debate and I've heard both sides and the many sides, even from Māori language experts, some of which say, pepeha is for Māori only because we have whakapapa to this land. Concepts like kaitiakitanga can only be used by Māori. And then I've heard others that say, well, for the language to evolve, we need everyone talking it, including non-Māori, especially non-Māori, because we just don't have the critical mass. So I think it's going to be really interesting, but I think what we can all agree, and you see it at days like Matariki that we've just had, when you see these young non-Māori kids and Māori kids, but you see these primary school kids singing and celebrating even Matariki and learning about that. I never learnt about Matariki when I went to school, so I'm still learning. But seeing them celebrate this real sense of Aotearoa New Zealand, and I deliberately use those words alongside each other. I've learnt the hard way. Sometimes I sort of have a go at dropping the New Zealand and I just go with Aotearoa, and you sort of see a few movements. And the reason why that's important is because you just want people to move on quickly. You don't want them to get stuck on the, what about New Zealand? Why are you using Aotearoa? And I have also, why are you using only New Zealand? Where's the Aotearoa? So I just use them interchangeably and beside each other. But I think as our country evolves, we just don't, the younger ones don't seem to have the same baggage that many of us have. And it turns out differently for different generations. But it's going to be such a cool country if we can. And that's part of Tuatea as well.
We're getting there. We're moving there.
Yeah,
You can't stop this now.
Yeah, I agree.
We've got a political. We've got some dinosaurs at the moment thrashing around, wanting to go back to the make New Zealand great again type stuff. You can't stop this movement now. It's got momentum and it's cool. It's cool and it's unique. It's unique. It's ours.
Yeah, that's the point, Harv. I know anyone that's been overseas and you admire people's cultures, depending on where you go, of course, but that's the really cool thing. I think when you get back to Aotearoa New Zealand, you just, to your point, and you watch the American politics, you watch some of those societies that's going on, you watch what's happening in Gaza, and you just think, man, I'm so grateful. I'm careful because I don't want that to come across as poor them, lucky us. But certainly this tura, that concept of tūranga wawa, literally a place for my feet to be in the earth. I love that for us as a country as we evolve, and I think it will be in the younger generations who will just, they don't, for you and I, it's quite complex, and we get a little bit, we start to deal with terminology. Even my dad who I love and adore, he used to say things, but what the bloody hell is this LGBTQI ABC plus? I was saying, Dad, oh, what the bloody hell? And even he says sometimes too, oh, these bloody Māoris, God, these bloody, I can't even understand what they're saying, I just want basic Māori. And so I'm like, yes, Dad. And so, it's not about saying, well, Dad, you've just got to get on the rainbow wave and, wave flag dolls. It's just acknowledging that's where people are at.
Look, I want to drop this into the conversation here. I did a podcast after our first lockdown with COVID. I went up to New Plymouth and caught up with one of our members, Liana Potu.
Yes, I went to university with Liana.
And it was one of the worst interviews I've ever had because I was just so excited to be out, and I just talked all the way through it.
Right.
It's just, poor Leanna just got swamped. And I started off because they had the iwi had blocked the roads.
Yes.
And so I started the podcast going, "What are you bloody Maoris up to now, Leanna?
What are you up to? Yeah.
And she just laughed and went, "Oh yeah, let's go there."
Yeah.
I think relationship between Māori and Pakeha, it's something that I want to be able to still have fun with you.
Yeah.
And to poke fun at each other.
Yeah.
Like that stick figure dance thing that I get teased about. I'm actually a good dancer, by the way. All right, just saying. I still think that's important.
Yeah.
That we can do it in a relaxed way, and we don't get too caught up in that. Anyway, that's a personal thing.
Well, I think I think certainly I'm grateful that I grew up in Te Kuiti because it was out in the regions, and I think living in Auckland, I love the city, but you can definitely tell when I meet people, and this is an inside half, but if I meet people and I meet non-Māori, Te Pākehā people, and if they come from Gisborne or they come from a region, then I just know they're always different up here. Not that I'm a snob to Aucklanders, but if I meet someone up here and they say, where did you grow up? And they'll go, Taumaranui or wherever. I'll go, choice. Matamata or whatever. I just know they have and they usually are more likely to be a bit more of a kasi than people that grow up in the big cities.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I can tell straight away.
Yeah.
And you can have this conversation, how long have you been up here? Blah, blah, blah. And they just have these.
And I want us to hold on to that because I think that's a healthy thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
it's
agree.
Because I was at a presentation recently, and it was with the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, and it was I don't know, 4 Māori presenters around the Wanganui River. Right? It was a beautiful thing around it having an identity and so forth, and people were very respectful to these Māori presenters, almost to the point of being a little bit too respectful,
right.
Okay, in my view.
Right.
And I thought the conversation got a bit stilted as a result.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there getting a bit frustrated with this. And I said, look, I've got a question. I said, you talk about wanting to treat the river as a person. And I go, yeah. And I said, well, you know what? Sometimes we don't treat people that well. And Māori are no exception to that. And what he was like, And it was, and a great conversation ensued, came from that, and it was, I wasn't being disrespectful. I was just like, I'm sick of, I don't think there's any need. No, but they weren't asking to be put on this pedestal. And I don't think that's healthy either. Or not being willing to engage in something a bit. And the conversation ensured that, we treat it like a newborn baby or an aged person, and I went, okay, that really resonated with me. But I just got frustrated with people didn't want to say anything that might upset Māori.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's the key to having good facilitators as well, that, when we say it's a safe space, and I used to say this in diversity, equity and inclusion, I used to say it is compulsory that you say what's on your mind. And anything you say, we all have to sign up to this over the next hour, that if you take offence to something that someone says, you also need to respond with that. But we're not going to shut it down, because I think the cancel culture that's where it kind of comes in. I think that's where it can stymie things, and people just become too shit scared to say anything.
That's it.
And so that doesn't get, so that fear piece, and I think that's a beauty of people like Rangi Mātamua, who's done with, Matariki. If you listen to what he has said, and I heard Che Wilson at this Matariki as well, saying that, Matariki has to be for all of us, and we have to have a place. And so if people celebrate in their own homes, doesn't have to be a hangi, although, if you do have a hangi, please invite me next to your house. But however you do it. And I think But that cancel culture can come in, and people, for a long time, people used to say, oh, you're too woke, and that used to be sort of weaponised. But I just say, yes, yeah, I am, probably. But anyway, let's move on.
I fucking hate that term.
Yeah, it's But I don't like it because it's been so overused and weaponised that actually its origins are out of America, out of Black America, and it's actually amazing, and it's around empowerment and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But
it's been taken and shifted, it's just because people say to me, I've said, so are you woke?
Yeah.
And I'm going, what, am I awake? What are you asking?
What are you asking?
What are you asking?
I just say now half. I just say, yeah, probably. Yeah, I think so. Anyway.
Well, I'm not that polite because it just pisses me off, the question, right? I'm just going, really? Because I've got no idea actually what they're asking. It's sort of, anyway. Whatever the topic is, we're off topic. Yeah. But Che is a good mate of mine, and he has been a huge influence.
He's great.
Because he spans the two worlds. And that's so beautifully.
And I think that's the key, Harv, in terms of the reason why I was able to sort of not last, because I didn't last at Fonterra, but I was there for 10 years. And one of the things that I used to always say certainly to Māori staff or young Māori coming through that would say to me, I want to be in your position, or how do you... I had this group from Waikato University, all Māori kids, and they came in and they said, Whai, there's no Māoris here. And I sort of take a deep breath, but I said to them, first and foremost, great, because that means that you have this opportunity to be different. Secondly, we can't just be in our world. We have to, and, Apira Ngata used to talk about it around learning, tools of the Māori and Pakeha. I think my grandparents used to say it differently. I had a grandfather who was a really hard worker who used to just tell us to be like a Pakeha, and certainly you should marry one. Yep. I think that has evolved now, but I still think that you need the ability to walk in multiple worlds, but certainly in a New Zealand context, to walk in at least two worlds and find a way to bring people into a conversation. So as I said, those things around pale male style, equally for even some for Māori sometimes, we used to have a debate every now and again around the place of the te tiriti at Fonterra, and the reality is, besides the fact that it's not a treaty partner in terms of a Crown Māori organisation, there probably is a place for it to have a position on te tiriti, but it's certainly some years away, and it's not something that you're going to put words into paper. Besides the whole, governance process it would have to go through. That's a difference with an organisation like here. We just say that te tiriti is a blueprint for everything we do. That said, many of us are still learning about what that means, and so how do we practice, every day? And do I wake up every day thinking about Article 1, my Article 1 and 2 rights? No. But if I can use any opportunity to sort of encourage people to talk about that. And also, I think the reality is people see 1840 and they go, well, that's ridiculous, it's 2025, so how does that even work? But again, it goes, I think, if it's framed in the sense of Aotearoa evolving as a country and a little country at the bottom of the world, we have our own opportunity to evolve and frame our own identity that's, special to us, then I think that's a great place to be.
I got challenged, how long ago? 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, by Rihanna Manuel.
Right.
And it was up here in Auckland and sitting there. Do you know Rihanna?
I do know of, yeah.
And she was in one of her moods, and she challenged me at this conversation, and she said, so how does collective intelligence honour the treaty as a private organisation? I said, well, I don't know, really. How?
Yeah, I don't know.
How? And she said, well, I don't know, but if anybody can work it out, you guys can. I went, oh, cool, thanks, okay. And she said, go away and do some work on that. It was just like, go away and do that. So the next morning, I had breakfast with Che on my way south. And so I put this to Che, and he said, oh, don't know. He said, I'll need to channel the ancestors. I go, oh, no. So he puts his arms out and he starts channeling the ancestors in this cafe, and a little white boy across the table just sitting going, oh, so embarrassing. Like, anyway, he goes, nah, nothing there. He said, we'll need a hui. So, long story short, we met with a group of Māori, myself and a handful of others down in Wellington. And it was the most uncomfortable maybe hour and a half I've had when people were expressing their grief and their from the history and the treaty not being honoured and whatever, and I'm going, you know, I just felt so out of my depth and so uncomfortable.
Well, and I think that's the great point, right, in terms of change. The reality is we have to be able to be comfortable with leaning into that uncomfortable, and I know that's an overused phrase, but when I say 1840 and it seems like such a long time ago, the reality is it's not. You know, it really isn't, and we have to. But again, it's the right leadership will find a way that we don't have to weaponise it against each other to move forward. And unfortunately, at the moment, our political kind of spectrum is it's at total odds, and it's at opposing odds, and we don't have the leadership, that sort of middle ground, giving us inspiration. It's being drawn because of the numbers, right? So the coalition government is the dictator, and that's just the nature of our democracy. But there are great New Zealanders who are coming through, who are not just political leaders, who will do the same thing and create this sort of underlying critical mass. My hope is, anyway, that will inspire us all, so that some of us are not on one side going, oh my God, you've been going on about this for too long, you need to get over it. There's others on the other side that are saying these are my rights that go back to before 1840 to blah, 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 and I'm never going to move. By the way, when are you going back to England? Because that's unrealistic as well. There'll be some leaders, and there are leaders, I believe, around at the moment, political leaders, that's one form, but that's only one form of leadership. You know, community leaders. Again, I mean, even in Auckland, there's a amazing marae that Rua Pōtaka marae, and there's a woman over there that runs it, and she's incredible and inclusive of the whole community. And it's one of the, you know, less affluent. They're not far from Pāneori Mura, very affluent. And, you know, just to see people like that, that's what I mean by leadership. You know, and I don't count myself amongst one of those. By the way, half, I'll be real about it. They do the stuff that many of us, it's out of sight and out of mind. So coming back to that uncomfortableness, there's just going to be, again, you know, depending on where we fit around the age, some of us, it will just be, you know, some of us will see change during our lifetime and some of us won't. You hear it sometimes around, you know, well, we just have to kind of wait for the old people to die to get change. And I think, well, yes, but it just goes back to just using language that it's just unhelpful. Yeah. You know, it's just not going to get change, and it's certainly not going to bring people into the conversations. I have them in my own whānau.
What was interesting with that was, I'm just trying to think, I think Liana might have been there that day as well. And Liana, if you weren't, sorry. Anyway, she might have been online. None of it was directed at me, but it was just like really uncomfortable. Yeah. And I'd never experienced that before.
Right.
As so up close. Right. I've seen it out there, but I've never experienced it so close. And then the conversation carried on, and you know, I thought, we've got all these special people together for a finite period of time, and so, you know, my brain is going, I just want to get something out of this, and then out of nowhere they started talking about cultural intelligence, and I don't know what happened, but I just said, oh, stop, and I wrote something down, and I said, is this what we're talking about? And I went through what was in my head, and they went, that's it. That's honouring the treaty. And it was four things. It was about being conscious, about being curious, about being courageous, and then maybe becoming competent. And they went, that's honouring the treaty. I went, huh. Anyway, we've used that now as a framework for everything we do. We apply that to everything we do, and it's a learning cycle, and it just goes round and round and round. You don't want to stop at any one of those. You want to just keep on moving. And every time you go around, a bit more knowledge and a bit more understanding. And it's not to do with just, it's with a whole lot of stuff. And what was fascinating with that was there was a guy there, Aniki Guru from Otahu, and I said to Aniki, I said, mate, that was pretty uncomfortable. He said, yeah, we knew if you put you under enough pressure, something would happen.
Yeah.
I go, oh, thanks, mate. That's great.
Well, and lots of companies, maybe unwillingly or unknowingly, particularly the ones that use the, manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, whanaungatanga. At the heart of it, those concepts, obviously those are Māori principles or Māori values or whatever, but, those are around care for others, sharing. I mean, that's what the treaty was about. It was around Māori saying, we acknowledge that, you're coming to New Zealand, Aotearoa, and you need a place for your people to live. So here, we're doing it on that basis. And then again, you get into the nuances of a misinterpretation and all the rest of it. But what I'm saying is you might be closer than you think you are. If you espouse values like manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, those tangas, I've heard this little thing around, they're too overused, and I think, well, if that's a school of thought that they're too overused, then I think you should have a look at your culture, because I don't think that you can ever care too much for your people. I don't think you can ever share too much with your people in a, what's good for the workplace sense.
Yep.
So actually, you might be closer than you think you are. It's just that because Te Tiriti and the Treaty of Waitangi, same thing simultaneously perhaps, has been weaponised and politicised so much, it will take great leadership within your workplaces to say, actually, we're probably closer, but let's have a conversation. And as soon as we start to feel ourselves getting uncomfortable and prickly, please do talk.
Yep.
If you're saying, no, I'm having visions of, Waitangi on the news, blah, 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 well, then people need to express that.
Yep.
And sometimes it is just a matter of people getting out. I got bullied by a Māori kid at primary school, and now I hate all Māoris. Okay, well, kia ora. But actually, for the purpose of this conversation, we need you to stick in a little bit more longer.
There's stuff we just don't understand sometimes. When Hannah, got up and we didn't understand that, right? We think that's a war cry, that she was declaring war on David Seymour, right?
Yeah.
And so that's and I've learnt from there that it's not that.
No, it was an expression, and you see 700 million people around the world see it, and down here in New Zealand, where, it's just incredible. But again, it's that it's communication, right? It's people talking, and sometimes I think, when we talk about a hui, and I even get frustrated with it, like when I used to go home in the weekend, and my mum would say, come to a hui, wherever, and I'd be like, oh my God, I've just come from. But I really admire that they have this, they stay in it, and they can have 10 hui, whereas I'm this little young upstart from the city that's come here, and I just want an outcome within an hour. That's unrealistic. And so I have to check myself when I go home. I have to check myself in a couple of senses. I'm from the city. I know how this all works. I've been in corporate. I know how to do it. I'm a lawyer. I know the answers. And they go round and round and round. And actually, I have to check myself that I'm at home now, and that's not how it rolls. And actually, you're not. You might have a flash title, you might have a degree, and all the rest of it. Doesn't mean you're the most clever person in the room. And actually, you probably, I'm talking to me, have to sit here for the most and sit with it. And it's a real fine balance that you have to. Because then I would quickly go back to, again, my day job even here, and it moves really quickly, and you've got answers. And that's just the nature of working in multiple worlds.
Yep. One of the joys of my work at the moment is that, so collective intelligence, we've been working away for 18 years now, and back then nobody understood collective intelligence. It was just a hunch I had.
Right.
And it was always about diversity, but it's become a lot more diverse as we've gone on. And what I love is that collective intelligence has now been talked about by a number of people around the world. And of course it's an Indigenous framework.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm Indigenous to this planet, and I'm working away at trying to be Indigenous to this land, and that from my perspective is Pakeha, and going, and I've talked to a number of people and going, is it possible for me to be Indigenous to this land? Well, there's lots of interpretations of that, and some would go no, and some would go it's possible.
Yeah.
And so I'm leaning into it's possible. connection to the land, caring for the land, being able to live from the land and be regenerative and all that sort of stuff. So that stuff I'm working on, but what gives me a thrill is that the world is starting to understand collective intelligence more, and that we need to listen to the quiet people, we need to listen to the fringes, we need to include people, and we need to go more slowly before we can go fast.
Yeah, I get that. I love that concept of, takiwātanga, which is the Māori word for neurodiverse, and it's a framing. Takiwātanga is loosely translated is everyone in their own time, in their own world, and I love that frame for this concept that has typically pushed people to the fringes, because it acknowledges that people, every single individual, has their way of seeing the world, and it doesn't make them less, doesn't make them more, it makes them themselves. And that's one example of the way I love that our language works in a really inclusive way that doesn't demonise people. It acknowledges that they just live in their own world and they see it, and it gives them this licence to then normalise whatever lane they travel in and however they see it. I love that concept, and I love that example around people seeing and see. And again, I think it's one of those examples that as we evolve as a country, that we start to normalise some of those things. Back to your point about being Indigenous, I think that's less about contesting whether or not you are, but it's certainly acknowledging that people within that are on their own learning journeys, and so the things that make you feel that way, because there's no point in me sort of staying here and saying, here's the 10 reasons why you're not.
Yeah.
If that's your belief, that's your belief.
Yep.
But certainly my expectation too, in terms of how I see Aotearoa and being Māori, is devoid of the things often that people quickly go to, i.e., I've either benefited unfairly because I'm Māori, or that I occupy the worst statistics as well. It's now a place of empowerment, and it's a place of, and certainly since I've got, with age, probably more so. And funnily enough, where I landed in my last role, and certainly coming into here, the timing's perfect, because it's timing perfect in terms of my learning journey, but also my personal journey, my age journey. And I often say to young people, and I used to say sort of to young women, in your 20s, when you're still learning, and 30s, you kind of learn and then unlearn, but I tell you what, once you turn 40, it's great on the other side. And they used to go, what? I always used to say it just from a place of relief, you go through. But also, if we can be the first country in the world, Aotearoa New Zealand, where our women in particular, but also all New Zealanders, but if I speak from a gender lens, if our women can be the first ones who are more comfortable faster with themselves and being themselves, and having a whole lot of things from Aotearoa New Zealand that makes them being able to grab onto those things, then that would be a great thing. Because again, I watch what's happening outside of here, and we certainly have pockets here, but I think Aotearoa New Zealand, we're in a really fortunate place, and hopefully, again, I used to say to people, just wait till you turn 40, it gets great. All the diets go out, and it's like, oh God, I don't have to spend any money. It's like, I'm just myself.
I then have a friend who says, you 60-year-olds are terrifying. I said, what do you mean? He said, you just don't give a shit. That's not completely true, but it's a little bit true.
Yeah,
it's a little bit true. Yeah, it's just like, I've had enough of this.
Yeah, I had enough. Even friends, people that I was like, oh God, I don't, people have used to say to me, oh, hey, we should catch up for coffee. And I said, it's okay, we don't have to. And I was like, do you know what? You're busy, I'm busy. We don't have to. But it's lovely to see you, but we don't have to say, oh, we should catch up, because we never do. People say, oh, we should catch up one time. I'm not going to see you for 10 years.
I have somebody who says, oh, yeah, let's whatever. I said, don't do that, because you never ring me. I ring you, you don't ring me. So you know what? Don't say something you're not going to do.
Yeah. So, well, actually, and not in a growly way. I just used to normalise it. It's all right. We don't have to catch up, but it's lovely to see you.
Yeah.
And then walk away. And I'm pretty sure both of us will be relieved. Oh, thank God there's no Oh, thank God we don't have to do that. But I think we should normalise that. We don't have to say, oh, we should catch up. No, it's all good.
Yeah.
But it's lovely to see you, but no, we don't have to.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I look. I'm not going to say her name, but I've got this lovely Māori friend, and she would every now and then she'd go, "I am sick of the Māoris." She had too much of the iwi, too much. Just like, I need to pull back.
Well, that's a reality. I don't think, and of course this is something that we can say, but I get it. I absolutely get it. I love and adore our people, but shit, it's hard. It can be hard. But also, if I go back to and I reference the people that fought for the very things, I've got to quickly remind myself that are people that fought for this, for us to be sitting here. Even you and I have.
Yep.
And so, yes, our people can be painful and they're hard, but it's also the one thing that is the reason why we're bloody here. And we didn't give up, and we never, ever, frustratingly, I get it to a lot of people, we never give up, and I get it, but that's just how we are. So Tipene, though, when Ngaitahu settled, he talked about walking through the green door, and he said Ngaitahu have to find a way to walk through and leave the past behind. And I think if you think about that philosophically, you think about their journey, it's something I always think about around trying to shed as much as we can, shed some of that generational, and I think that's what to Aotearoa, one of the reasons why I wanted to come and work here, beside the fact that, if I'm absolutely honest, I was out of job. I needed a job. I was on a career break that was like, oh God, I now need a job. I love that it's, as I said, it's part of the solution, and we can pick up, so many deprivation metrics to fill your heart's content if that's where you want Māori to stay, but this is one of the places that's part of the solution, which I love.
Here's something I've become aware of, because I thought, tech was going to make a huge difference to underprivileged communities or startups and all that sort of carry on. The reality is startups are for privileged people mostly, because they fail. And it's how many times you can go again and go again and go again that makes a difference.
Yeah.
So my little romantic notion of that was sort of shattered, and going, actually, no, it's not.
And the same deep biases you can see coming through. I think there's most of the startup and investment, certainly the big investors, are made in young white males, so you can see that deep bias. One of the things I used to talk about when I was in that DEI role was the fact that, air-conditioned units, I always used to struggle, and so every now and again my glasses will fog over, and I used to always try to take the lift, but sometimes I would take the stairs, and I'd get into these rooms and people are ready for me to present, and I'm got foggy glasses, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm a sweaty mess. That's because air conditioning units are also tested on white males. And so I used to normalise those things, everywhere have. And so I used to normalise that, not to make people feel bad, but just to say, hey, so my glasses are probably going to fog over. That's because I'm a hot, sweaty, chemically challenged mess. But anyway, it'll calm down. And so people used to just have a bit of a joke about it. And then you could traverse some of those conversations. So coming back to your point, you can see the same bias coming through in terms of... So that's a big part for us, very, very big on digital equity, but also in a partnering way. Yep. Not going in and saying, look, we're going to give you the internet, your marae, give you the internet and you guys all become rich millionaires. This is around quality of life. So making sure, again, that we're going back to those sort of inclusive wealth indicators. Yeah,
inclusive wealth indicators. Is such a thing?
Well, that's the framework that I mentioned before.
Yeah, I didn't listen, did I? Inclusive wealth indicators.
So this is around some of the more recent iwi, they've got invested big into insurance, and they've invested big into health, and this is around raising the collective indicators for what health is. So literally people are living longer, people are not subject to the same terminal illnesses. They actually access insurance and all the rest of it. So those are around those inclusive wealth indicators.
Just thinking here, because this is I get it, and it's a new term, okay, and it's being measured. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that we've been talking about, again, as a Māori organisation, exactly what makes us that, and our not going to say responsibility, but our real desire to protect the use of reo Māori in this organisation. So how do we practice it every day? How are we using? What is our contribution? So in a really inclusive way. And how do we, as the Māori staff, also include our non-Māori staff, make them feel uncomfortable? But also how do we just make sure the language is flying? So I don't know how you probably will talk to people, but there's a evolving kind of thing called a Māori meter, Mauri, and that's around, again, you kind of can't put a number on it per se, but if you were to stand in our building on a Tuesday morning and hear karakia being used as normal, instead of, let's have a hui, oh, by the way, better do a karakia, that those sorts of things. How is it really normalised so that the language is protected and used? And that's what we talk about a lot here, protection.
So the Māori meter is a measure of energy?
Yeah, well, so Māori, Māori is the translation, so the English translation. But I think Māori is around just that feeling sense, how do you, when you go into a workplace, I don't know, it was important for me because I knew that you'd walk down, so I knew to come keep an eye out for you, those sorts of things. Like how else does it show more care for someone to make someone feel included? And
send them to the wrong address.
Send them to the wrong address.
Yeah.
In a torrential storm. Carrying all these stuff.
Loved it. Where am I? Look, we've got to wrap up soon,
Yes.
Haylee. I'm sorry.
No pie.
We could talk for a long time.
Yes.
Tell me about, we mentioned before we started, tell me about the space you got into where you stopped learning.
Yeah, I think I don't think it wasn't deliberate, but I'd gone from sort of my previous role as Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. It's a real enterprise-wide, and then some changes happened, and I found my space as a Director of Māori, and it really didn't happen consciously, but I think two things happened. As I said, I felt like I stopped learning, and I think that was because I'd got to, and it certainly had happened in my mind. It certainly, is that your machine?
Something's happened. Something's happened here. No, we're still going.
Yeah,
I was looking at the wrong thing.
changed,
No, I thought technically we'd had a glitch here, but we don't.
So in a nutshell, I think that what had happened is I had become so paralysed with things external to myself, and some of them imagined, by the way. That inner critic had become so loud that I had got into a kind of place of just trying to pretty much be what was the most popular thing to say. And it wasn't challenging. And some of it was some social cues. I think, when you get to a certain level, and that was, I think they call it C-suite, So very exec level for the first time for me. But funnily enough, I knew most of the people because I'd been in the company long enough. So, they'd been. But what had happened is I think I unconsciously spent so much time trying to work to satiate everyone else's comfort that I probably wasn't both learning, and I certainly wasn't challenging, and or I was interpreting or listening to things for the sake of, again, just regurgitating, just packaged up a different way, and perhaps just so that people would agree. And I think some of that was learned behaviour. I think some of it was observed behaviour. That's how you survive at that level. You do enough that you come across still together, still clever, still articulate, but don't rock the boat too much.
Yeah. Not authentic.
Inauthentic. Certainly not myself.
Yeah.
And
it's yuck.
Yeah, and I was leading a team at the time, and I think it played out again without me realising with my team. had interesting sort of dynamics. I had a remote team, so a lot of it was hard to pick up because I'm not making excuses here, or I'm not intending to make excuses, but, that conversation around kanohi ki te kanohi you can typically pick up versus on the phone. People can still sit there and you can't really tell. But that bubbled up under the surface, and so I didn't realise at the crux I was at until I left in December last year and had this break from January till May-ish, probably about March, when everyone else went back to work and I lost all my beach buddies because everyone went back to reality, and I had to spend a lot of time by myself. And so I spent quite a lot of time struck with reality pretty much around, okay, so you've just, left this big role, New Zealand's biggest export company, and now here we are.
Who are you?
And who are you? Yeah. And what are you good at? What do you do? What do you
You're
stand
still
for?
relevant.
Still relevant. Am I, washed up? And I spent a lot of time by myself, facing that reality. I wasn't sulking. I didn't sulk for too long. As I mentioned, I had my girl when I was 17 and got my law degree, went through, I remember nights typing at 3 o'clock in the morning as a 17-year-old feeding my baby. Anyway, her father and I, we had a go, but that all went to custard. And so, again, in terms of life horizons, when we separated and certainly when we got divorced, that was a big life horizon where I had to do some real deep work on myself. This felt like this was, again, that I'd reached another intersect around, and there's probably some realisation in there that I'd perhaps treated people below their expectations, and I had to own some of that, and also deal with the fact that I was now, okay, where are we going to next, girlfriend? One, because financial reality is, okay, this has been a good time, but can't last forever because we need to pay our bills and a mortgage. But also I probably spent a month doing some deep work on myself, and by deep work, I just mean literally facing some truths pretty much. And then, kind of decided actually a lot of that, it's just not serving me well physically, mentally, but also not setting me up for my next role, which, and fortunately for me, this one came along and it was an awesome opportunity. I was obviously successful, got the role, and here I am now. But when I go back to, I think that I had become so preoccupied with trying to fit into social cues that had paralysed me to the extent that I just wasn't learning. I thought I was, and I thought I was being clever, and I thought I was at the top of my game, but I was just on a tune. That's the reality.
Haylee, we got to wrap this up soon. I just want to acknowledge something. We'd never met before today, and I just think this is so cool that you're sitting down talking to me about this stuff. I just want to say thank you.
Kia ora.
It's very cool.
Kia ora. I mean, for me, if there's, they say if there's one person, but I think my point is certainly just to reiterate that, yes, do the deep work, whānau, but you can move on as well. And it's okay, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And I again, back to me normalising that. Should we catch up? No, we don't have to. You can normalise that life happens, but it's not over, and it's not. And also, though, you've got to find the ability or the courage or the strength or whatever it is to go, that was a time in my life where things didn't quite go, and I get that now, but you can still move on. And, again, humans are funny old things. Friendships come and go. Some of them, might not look the same, but it's okay. You can normalise. I think, no one's got their shit together. That's exactly right from what you see on the outside. But don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what's happening outside of you. Just do that work. Get inside your mind.
And growth is a funny thing, because growth, not everybody grows at the same rate, right? Happens in marriages, happens in all that sort of stuff. So it's not a linear thing. And you have periods of stagnation, and that's okay, right? And then you have these spurts. But growth can be tricky because all of a sudden you start believing stuff that's different than you believed before.
Yeah.
And that might actually leave some people behind, some
Yeah.
old friends who go, no, I
yeah.
don't agree with that shit anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so growth is not always comfortable.
Yeah, and it's so is not there. So yeah, I mean, in wrapping this up, I just encourage everyone or anyone or even one person that's listening to this is don't it's that whole thing around judging yourself relative to other people. Just do that work on yourself and then just look around and try find more that you're grateful for. Try find more, and if your mind's tricking you into going, oh, look at that person, a great car, great role, great, oh my God, they're so clever. Trick your mind back to going, and so am I. And this is the stuff that I'm good at. And this is what I believe, actually. And this is my opinion. Or this is what I want to learn about. And be the person in the room that normalises things like, hey, I wear glasses and they're probably going to fog over, but that's okay, just give me 5 seconds. And people will go, oh, okay, yeah, cool. All the nerds in the room too that also wear glasses, they go, oh my God, that happens to me. Or I'm chemically challenged woman, I'm probably going to get ahead of myself. Normalise those things, but also don't let your mind trick yourself into the negatives. Sometimes I think it's okay to have a couple critical mind voices, whatever, just to keep you honest, but please, everybody, e tiwi, do your best to find more good, positive, both in yourself and what you're surrounding yourself with in your life, because it's absolutely true as well, and quickly go to that space, and it's so much better to be there.
Ka pai.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Haylee.
You're
This
welcome.
has been an absolute joy, and we've got another life to get on with.
Yes.
Outside this little room.
Yes, yes.
I have absolutely loved this.
Kia
Thank
ora.
you. Thank you to Lara for setting it up.
Yes. Thank you, my friend.
And good luck with your next stage.
Tēnā koe, thank you, Hav. O tērā kia koutou e whakarongo ana, tēnā koutou. Kia ora.